Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Interlinked. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playa3ull Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked. I am joined today by Felix, the absolute wrinkle-brained source of the pod. Whenever we have something that's going way over mine and Ben's head, at least mine, we always love having Felix on here. Of course, we got Ben here mobily out on his adventures. Always stoked to have you here, Ben. Felix, what's going on?
Good morning, good afternoon. Happy to be here. I'm doing good. Starting off the year strong. I feel like we're on January 3rd, the third day of the year, and a lot of cool things are already happening in the space. Markets are moving up, bags are pumping, and well, I'm here with you guys, having a good time.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that little rebound from 92,000. It seemed like the doom and gloom on the timeline was all-time highs as we were around 90K. So really shows that absolute terms mean nothing for morale, and it's all relative.
Yep, exactly. We're like, if we break down below 90, we're screwed. That's bull cycle over.
Free fall, back to 16.
Yeah, exactly.
GG, thank you for playing.
There's actually an interesting psychological effect for humans where if we gain something and then it retraces a little bit, let's say it goes to 100 and then goes to 50 versus if it just went straight from 0 to 50, you're actually more inclined to be happier if it goes 0 to 50 than if it goes 100 to 50 because you feel like you lost something.
Yeah.
Versus if it just goes 0 to 50, you're like, oh, I only gained something. Even if it goes 100 to 75, you're less happy than if it goes 0 to 50. It's a weird psychology thing.
Yeah, I think the ratio is about like 1 to 3. So I think you need to win 3 times as big to recover the sunk emotions of a loss. There was some study about that a few years ago. It's very, very interesting. And if you can get out of that mentality, I think you're going to be the happiest person alive.
Yeah, and on that note, this took me like 6 months to read. I think I picked it up like a couple months before your bachelor party, Ben, and I just finally finished it, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman, I believe it's pronounced. I'm probably butchering that. Sorry, Dan, if you're a loyal listener of Interlinked. But he's a Nobel Prize winning economist, and it's literally just front to cover or front to back, just all these different heuristics that like trip people up and things with comparison, things about, sort of like getting information in certain orders as we were describing, like drastically affects how it appeals, like shortcomings in decision making, sort of on Darius Dale 42 macros, like key reading list that he took a lot of inspiration from. But it's a slog, no doubt about it, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, no, I get you. And just because we're on book talk as well, right now I am reading The Lords of Easy Money, which is focusing on the US economy and the Fed and so on, which is also very, very interesting given the markets that we are in to understand how like quantitative easing has been such a hurdle and challenge and something that a lot of people or some people were against already day one, but it still went through and it's brought us this economy that we're in right now. It's very interesting.
Yeah, one of my favorite points of like, I'm not sure if that was covered in this particular book. I just added it to my reading list, but I've read a bunch about sort of like easy monetary policy and all of the like secondary and tertiary effects. I mean, I think one of the most interesting is just that if you discount money where money essentially becomes free, the barrier to entry for bad ideas becomes so low that capital misallocation is sort of a absolute guaranteed carry on effect of that. And you can certainly see, from the, Michelle Obama walking path that costs like 60 or $600 million or something to, all of these startups that everyone's like, how is this ever going to make money? we got some crazy innovation from it. A lot of like the venture capital space obviously benefited from it. I don't know if we would have gotten an Uber or an Airbnb where all these companies could have run at a loss for so long. So it's definitely pros and cons, but you certainly end up with a ton of capital misallocation.
Yeah. The mismanagement is severe, and then also, yeah, the boom bust cycles, right? When money is free to borrow, then you just keep pumping in more money, and scammy ideas come up and become more and more prevalent. That's why you have the dot-com boom and so on as well, in my opinion.
Plus, then you
Okay,
get
I'm so passionate about this. I think it was you, Nick, that actually recommended this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Was that you?
no, that wasn't me, but I'll add that to my list as well.
Okay, it's a must read. It talks about how the Federal Reserve was created, but just to kind of go through just a couple of the mind fucks from that book. Let's talk about all money that is out there circulating in the economy today. Every single dollar that is out there was first created how? It was first created by being a loan from one bank to either another bank or to a business or to a person or whatever. But that means every single penny and dollar that is in existence right now, that is debt
Yep.
that is floating around in the economy, which means every dollar that is out in the economy is being paid, like there's interest being paid on that to a bank, which in essence means that we're all working on a system where we are perpetually indebted to the big banks
Yep.
and the Federal Reserve and the government who's in on it and helping to keep that system alive. So we're basically all working for the banks. Okay. So that's one layer. The next layer then is all of the banks have the ability to every time they lend out money to create more money out of thin air. And they can like 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 or whatever lend against every dollar that is put into their reserves. I mean, it's crazy. So
Hmm.
they're able to create money out of nothing. But what that enables them to do is it enables them to take more and more risk over time because things get set up like, for example, FDIC. On its face, the FDIC seemed like a good idea because it's like, oh, all the people have the ability to now have their money protected, and so we feel safe. Okay, but where does the money come from for the FDIC insurance? It comes from the other banks. And so what that sets up is that sets up a system of misaligned incentives where the banks that go and get in trouble and then need to get bailed out by the FDIC fund, which is essentially what that's doing, is it's bailing out the banks. What that means is that the banks who did not fuck up, who had to pay, are basically bailing out the banks that went too hard in the paint and got too aggressive. So that means you're penalized for playing by the rules and being a good bank. So what do they all do then? They all must then start lending out more aggressively so they can start earning as much as possible because they see the ones that are doing that get the most money, and then when they mess up, it's fine because they just get bailed out. So it incentivizes all the banks to take too much risk, and it incentivizes a really bad system. And then what happens at the end of the day? Well, the FDIC doesn't have enough money. They have to go back to the government for a bailout. They inevitably get bailed out, and that comes to us in the form of inflation, and that sucks for us, the taxpayer. Okay, but then it gets even more insidious because you then have this fucked up system, and eventually the banks will run out of people and businesses to loan to within the United States. So then what do they have to do? They look for an even bigger target outside of the United States, and the biggest targets that they have are other governments. And so then the battle is to see who can lend the most out to external forces like external governments. And then you have this weird setup where they're trying to lend as much as possible because as the bigger the loans that they can give out, the more important they are to the structural world economic system, world financial system. And so the more incentivized the government is to bail them out if they fuck up. And so all the incentives are just perverse. And at the end of the day, they're all relying on government bailing them out, which government will. And at the end of the day, what that means is they're going to print which in other words means they're going to tax us through inflation. So it's a whole just set of mind fucks and just, anti productive people adding to the real economy. And the incentives are just so that the financial system can basically just extract value over and over and over again. So anyways, I know it's a little bit of like, tinfoil hat and doomer mentality, but like this stuff is very real and you can just see it happening in real life. It's pretty crazy.
Yep, yep. And then just to flip it on its head as well, the most interesting thing is that the richest people in the world as well, they can get away from a lot of tax as well, just because they are heavily indebted as well, because they can use their equities or their overall net worth as collateral towards the loans that they're wanting to take, and they go into debt, and debt is tax free, which is great. Just another side to the story as well. So it's a very interesting, mismanaged or kind of skewed way of living. I feel like that the overall world economy is functioning right now as well, especially how it's so heavily tied to the US economy as well.
Yeah, and that, to bring it back to crypto, it allows them, because we have this sort of like pseudo partnership between the banks and the federal government, it gives them an enforcement arm where there's no arbitration. So if they decide to bail out Bank A, but they let a bunch of crypto banks go belly up, or they use their leverage with the banking system to debank people in crypto or other industries. Obviously, it happened in the cannabis industry. It was a very like famous example, which it's still a problem. ISPO, and you got to use like an ATM card because they're not on any of the um like regular financial rails. So you have to literally like do a withdrawal essentially to pay in like an all cash business. The other interesting thing is it just like allows these big banks to essentially put up a monopoly barrier where the hurdle to start up a new bank is so incredibly high that you end up with just like these sort of like old institutions. That obviously leads into, the wealth disparity that we're seeing, that in the United States, we are at roaring 20s level pre-depression wealth disparity where, such a tiny amount have, I think it's the top 10% have like 50% of like the income that's generated. So usually it's in these fourth turning like regimes, and you're seeing sort of the pressure around the world like sort of like build up. So it'll be interesting to see, if that has revolutionary implications or if that's technological revolutionary implications where, wealth disparity sort of gets tackled by things like crypto and meme coins of all things, where, people who didn't have access to this sort of money multiplying printer get new avenues.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yes. I think we should probably do a dedicated podcast episode about just the world economy and why crypto is very, very interesting for it. Because ever since we moved away from the gold standard and so on, it's just a digital number, which is, frankly speaking, terrifying of how easy money is printed. That's one part of the book as well that I mentioned, where they basically make the decision on increasing the debt on the Fed balance sheet. And it's just one command to increase the overall money in circulation. And they print billions, if not trillions of dollars that way.
Yeah, and to bring it home to right now, it's interesting how that has such an effect on liquidity. So like this is me taking off my patriotic American hat and putting on my capitalist, I just want to make money hat. The best thing for our bags, in my opinion, is if they don't lift that debt ceiling for a quarter or two, which is looking like the Democrats, that's their only leverage over, sort of this Republican sweep over all the branches of the government. Um, and then they've got 800 billion in their TGA account, which if you get your credit card cut, which is essentially what happens when you hit the debt moratorium or the debt limit and the moratorium gets waived, is you got to pump that 800 billion into the economy, which adds liquidity and it's good for our bags. But as you said, we should have a dedicated episode on the economics. We brought you on because I'd love to utilize your wrinkly brain to describe what the fuck are AI agents. It's the meta that's going on right now. So I'd love to get your take on it.
Sure thing, sure thing. I mean, last episode when I was on here as well, we spoke a bit about what AI in general is, and the simplest way to describe like an LLM that we've been playing around with ChatGPT, Claude, and what have you, is that it's basically a huge statistical model. It's just working with statistics on steroids, a huge amount of data to kind of predict the words that are supposed to become out based off of a sequence of words that are coming in. So it's all about a numbers game. Now, that was interesting for some time to solve certain tasks and whatnot. But after a while, the overall interest in it kind of died off a bit, and new innovation had to push forward. And one thing that came out was agents. And agents on their own are an interesting idea, because instead of just being a big AI model that takes input from a human and it gives you output, an agent kind of has a feedback loop as well. So it takes the input from a human or some other agent or whatever to kickstart a process, and then it can resend more and more over time to effectively create a longer persisting operation. And what that allows it to do is effectively act on its own inputs and outputs to keep moving around and working, which more and more acts like an autonomous system, like what humans do. We act on our own free will.
So yeah, I think maybe it could be helpful to even talk about like what is it doing? Because I think a lot of people see like, okay, maybe the agent's just out there doing stuff, but what does that like? What does that mean? What is it actually doing? What like what's going on with all that? You know, like is there somebody behind the scenes that is somehow hooked up a like is it a software that then sends signals through API to Twitter and that's posting like, you know,
Yeah.
are they posting stuff? Are they doing stuff? Like maybe just kind of actually break down the whole nuts and bolts of it from the beginning.
Yeah. So the way that agents are looking mainly right now is you have the LLM kind of acting like the brain. And if you look at it just from an LLM perspective, you don't have any necessary inputs, which means that you cannot create those outputs that we spoke about. The interesting part with agents that we have now is that people are creating multiple of these different input channels that you can do to trigger and interact with it. And then they also dually act as these output channels. The examples that you mentioned were Twitter APIs. So you can basically read and write information to Twitter or X. You can do the same thing with Telegram, Discord, and other such social channels, which kind of got the most hype and anticipation. And what it effectively is just that initial input channel giving information to the LLM. It has some extra information around that as well to generate an output. And then if the LLM has given so-called action keywords, which basically says, hey, I want to act on this, the underlying system, which kind of you can say acts as the body of the agent, then acts on that to, for example, post a tweet or send a response message or generate an image and so on and so forth. And that's also how you can get agents to actually interact, because you can then connect these channels between different agents to then send these messages between them as well. And then given that an agent acts on input, be it from itself or somebody else, you can then chain them and have them work together.
It's basically like well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, I think a lot of people have this platonic ideal in their heads of, okay, I'm gonna watch a YouTube video and like set all the stuff up myself as a non-dev normie. But it seems like there is a little bit more of like, there's a little bit more difficulty behind the scenes. I still am not convinced that people really have this clear picture in their mind. So could you maybe walk us through if you're going to launch, let's say you're going to launch something, what is that process? What would that process look like from start to finish, and how long would it take?
So if I were to launch an agent, it has both an on-chain and an off-chain aspect. If we talk about Web3, an agent on its own can exist without a token. But the meta right now is to have a token associated with it and then use that to some way, shape, or form, allow people to either help decide on how the agent is to evolve, like governance, or just actually use it as a currency to interact with the agent or solve problems. But if we skip that side for now and focus on the agent itself, you would need to either use off-the-shelf solutions that are available. That's where you have like the low to no code solutions out there, like Virtual's launched Game. There are a couple other ones now. There's like something .bid or whatever to help you launch DAOs and whatnot. And there are a couple of other tools out there as well. They are mainly social interaction agents. So there you don't have to do too much stuff with it, but they're also going to be very much vanilla standard, maybe Twitter interactions, maybe some Discord interactions, maybe some Telegram stuff, but more lower level complexities like trading, automations, more intricate work and so on, that will potentially go lost. But if you want to get something that you can just talk with and have fun with, you can do that without too much code knowledge. But you potentially have to pay an extra fat bill for it.
Now, one of the pushbacks that I see around like sort of like AI agents is they're essentially called glorified like chatbots often.
Yeah.
Could you kind of walk through what the differences are, if there are any, between the standard AI agents that we're seeing out in the space and like a chatbot that you would interact with if I, couldn't get someone on the phone at United?
Yeah, I mean, the chatbots these days are powered very, very similarly. I would say they were probably the first agents you had out there without necessarily knowing it. I know Amazon has been doing a lot of research on it to scale their business. Other businesses like the big FANG companies have done the same. And if you take a typical bot that you have on a phone that is very, very shitty, they are usually old school AI. They're more rules based, as it's called. You basically say, hey, if this happens, then do that. Typical coding logic, which means that you have a very limited set of handling this, which kind of didn't scale well because you had a lot of the complexities with how people are asking questions. So interpreting that is hard. Figuring out, like covering problems that you don't necessarily have in mind at the moment as well is going to be problematic because then you need to launch new things and update the code and whatnot. And that's where LLMs came into the picture. So the core difference here is more or less just the underlying brain. So the reasoning underneath it all. And then the way that like the standard vanilla agents that we said right just now, they work, they are basically just smart chatbots because the main function they have is to interact with them in some form of written text or calls or whatever. That's all it is. Now, the powerful side to it, I would say, comes with the feedback loop aspect and figuring out what you can do to do more actions on top of it. That's where the agent side comes into play. It actually is able to affect its own environment and other environments as well. That's the main discerning thing, I would say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I like the idea of the like sort of chatbots being the original sort of like AI agents. I think it makes it much more graspable to have like a starting point for especially people who are trying to get up to speed on AI agents like myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's like text has always been the primary way of communication that we preferred, especially in the interwebs and the digital realm as a whole. So it fits the narrative very, very well. Now, again, glorified chatbots, and some people in the space, they're just looking to do the monetary pump and dump scheme and so on. They don't necessarily even spin up the agent, as we've seen as well. Some people are very controversial because there are takes of human interaction or responses as well, and it's kind of like the agent is breaking character, and then the response is, oh, AGI, or oh, tech is just moving so fast, and it just isn't moving that fast. It's very interesting.
Now a word from our sponsors.
What's up, crypto gamers? Shout out to our sponsor, Myria. Myria is revolutionizing Ethereum-based gaming with its powerful L2 scaling solution. Think zero gas fees, instant transactions, free NFT minting, and more. Myria offers a suite of tools that are tailor-built for game development, including game-specific SDKs, a spec'd-out marketplace, Web3 spiked leaderboards, new AI super tools, and more. All this fueled by a fleet of player-run nodes that are a breeze to operate and pump out daily rewards for supporting the ecosystem. Plus, check out Meta Rush, the Battle Royale obstacle runner by Myria Studios, dropping very, very soon.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
So we're actually going to need AI agents to police the other agents and be like, okay, hey, we know this one's a LARP, this one's a LARP, because it does seem like there's a ton of them out there, as you pointed out.
Yeah, and that kind of happened with ChatGPT and everything as well, right? You basically had other agents or AIs to help with solving and identifying probabilistically if something was generated by AI or a human. And the same thing goes here. It's just an identifiability problem. Now, whether or not you need to have an agent to do that, it's basically how you package it, right? I think it was Saigar or somebody else on Twitter that mentioned it they framed it very nicely. Right now, agents are basically just a big LLM with a bunch of APIs around it to help make it seem autonomous. The future or the more interesting side would be when you can make the brain, so the LLM, smaller, the model more efficient and more lightweight, and then see how you can have these agents work together and collaborate as a swarm. There are some projects that are called swarms and so on as well, but if they act as a colony and they can work as a bunch of different individuals in a collective, that's where you can get the real interesting power as well, because then you don't have to burn huge amounts of money in a cloud center somewhere up in the north or whatever to run their logical brains behind it all.
Yeah, that's a super important part is the resources that actually go to back up these. Now, for the, I guess, what's the resource footprint for some of the AI agents that we're seeing now? Are those relatively light? Are people using open source LLMs? Are they hooking it up to like ChatGPT? Are they building them in-house?
The most standard ones use Claude or OpenAI, I would say. Some are starting to use OpenRouter, which is sort of like an aggregate LLM finder out there and gives you resources and so on to that. But most of them are still big LLMs, which means that it's quite expensive to run. You don't necessarily pay that much of a bill yourself to use it, but the environmental effect or the footprint and the overall cost of running it is quite substantial. I mean, when the new numbers came out for, I think it was O3 for OpenAI, they're putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars a week to just keep the current models running. It's super expensive.
And for them, they're benefiting because they're essentially open sourcing, not their software, but open sourcing their inputs for the LLM. So the LLM is essentially being trained by all of these different use cases that are being used, and they're getting all that data. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, which has its pros and cons as well, because I think some people have noticed as well, the more you use, for example, ChatGPT and so on over time, it seems like the models are degrading to some extent as well. And the question is if it's just like the Pikachu effect where you think it's degrading, or it's actually because it's training off of the humans that are interacting with it. And then you might question, is the human populace just getting more and more stupid over time as well as we're using AI too much? I'm leaning more and more towards that camp, unfortunately, but that's because people are just getting lazy.
Yeah, the laziness is a big piece.
Yeah, very much so. But yeah, so to answer that question, yes, they're getting the benefit of more data usage, which they can then opt to use. The hard part is identifying which data is good versus which one is bad. Like one of my mentors used to say to me is, when you train a model, 90% of the work is the actual data management, because if you put garbage in, you'll get garbage out.
And we've talked about some of the simpler use cases and how they're getting like attached to tokens. What are some of the use cases that are more on the like interesting cutting edge sort of side, or some of the use cases that like you're really excited about?
I am quite excited in the automation space and infrastructure space, as in like AI16Z building out ELIZA OS, which is basically a framework to allow you to easily create your own AI agents. It still needs a lot of love, a lot of work. I'm actually working on some PRs there as well myself. And it just makes it more accessible for people, which is one of the beautiful things with Web3. The other side to it is the automation side, which I find more interesting for the end users. There have been some ones that are simple, like Banker, which basically opened up a wallet for each user on Farcaster or Warpcast, and you can basically just tell it to trade for you if you send it money, and it basically did it for you. The more like in-depth ones that are coming out now is, for example, Hey Anon, which is supposed to help with all like DeFi interaction, where you effectively ask it to do something for you. You could do it declaratively, and it effectively then does it for you, like multiple swaps, converting between currencies, bridging, and so on, which I think is relevant. I don't necessarily see it as a long-term sustainable solution, because it removes the complexity of the user, but it also means that the underlying rails of doing it is kind of inefficient. So I think this is going to be like there's going to be a lead time before we start optimizing for overall AI and also just reducing user friction, so that it's kind of built into the overall systems instead of actually having the AI do all the operations for you. But it's a very interesting piece right now either way.
And where do you think the biggest productivity gains are going to come from? Because I think we're kind of at an interesting spot where like we're seeing a tremendous number of I would say big technology companies investing into this stuff. And obviously all of us retail participants are pretty psyched about it. And there's just a lot of narrative heat, let's call it, that's come up around this AI stuff. But like, not always, but oftentimes where there's smoke, there's fire. Where's the fire here?
Great question. I mean, in Web3, finance is definitely going to be a big driver. Like you're seeing now yesterday you had the AI COs and so on, but looking to automate more complex processes is something that people are trying to use with AI in general right now. I would say like fund management, trading as a collective, and so on is something that is trying to people are trying to monetize quite severely. Is it going to be a great solution? I don't know. But I think that's one of the big drivers right now. But that's just because there's a monetary incentive. Outside of that, general productivity, I think the main thing is automating arduous tasks like we just spoke about as well, that doesn't necessarily have a trivial solution to do or to build out, which could be similar to how you did home automation with the different home assistant kits and so on a few years back, where you had the IoT craze that never really exploded, which could be things like having your AI have access to certain APIs in your home, or having an AI be able to string together a bunch of operations, like, for example, helping do your taxes or do consultations with you and so on. Like everything that is hard for the everyday person to achieve, but if you have some more knowledge, you can achieve it yourself with high probability, is going to be where you get the most benefit. So you don't have to spend a lot of money for hiring a certain like domain expert for minor stuff, because that can get quite expensive.
Well, I love the idea of it replacing user interface, because you had mentioned almost as a little bit of a throwaway, like bridging and things like that. But that is still a huge barrier to entry. I mean,
Yep.
I've been now in crypto for, a good few years now, and still I'll let opportunities just slide by because I'm like, I do not feel like bridging to another chain and getting this like set up where if I could, you could see it replace so many different user interfaces that are right now so like clunky, where you could just be like, as you described, like, hey, bridge this money to this chain and purchase this meme coin before it hits this market cap. If it hits this market cap by the time you're done, don't do it.
Exactly. And I think, as I mentioned, I think it's a good intermediary step, but this is also kind of what we're trying to tackle with Myria, which is my main occupation right now. And that is building out a open and efficient cross-chain payments market, which effectively allows you to define what you're looking to achieve, which is move funds from one wallet to another across chains and convert it into a specific currency, which is effectively what a cross-border payment is in traditional finance sense, right? And if you can build that into one operation, which effectively means you sign one transaction and the rest is handled for you on a lower level, I think that is the long-term solution, because that also will reduce gas costs, so it's not going to burn as much in your pocket. It's not going to involve too many steps, even if the AI does it, which means that it's less error-prone, and it actually makes it more accessible for everybody either way. But in the meantime, if the AI can do it for you, I still say it's a step in the right direction. But if you can then pair those together as well, where you just say, hey, AI, pay Ben 250 USDC on Arbitrum to this address, then, and it just charges that from whatever wallet is accessible to me, that's amazing, right?
Now, I just had one little brain blast, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ben, just in case you had a follow-up there. Is gas going to become something that obviously crypto people are very used to if you're operating at all on chain? Is gas going to be used for AI? Because in some ways there's a lot of similarities. It's based on sort of like supply and demand and resource production. So you could sort of imagine a world where you give your AI agent a task and it goes, okay, based upon usage right now and projected usage over the course of this process, it's going to cost you X.
Yep. No, I mean, it already is. So if you do API-based access to things like ChatGPT or like OpenAI or Claude or whatever, you have credits and they get charged. You have a balance that gets charged every time you make a request. So it is basically usage-based. It's a typical SaaS model. You pay for what you use. And that's kind of what came into Web3 as well over time. And that is the whole gas mechanism. So it's already being used. And the problem now is that if you use an agent and then you also use the blockchain, you have to do double spending as well. So if you can bunch that out together, that's probably going to be a bigger win.
I want to scope out a little bit because this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'm pretty sure it's definitely going to be relevant to Web3, but maybe slightly indirectly. I've been reading a lot about how like the big tech firms are worried about the amount of power that AI is going to consume, and I kind of have a theory that, and I think it's pretty obvious. But that means that big tech is now incentivized to invest into power and energy. So I think we're probably going to see just a huge amount of additional capital move into that direction. And so something's going to happen there. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but AI is a one-way street. We're going to start using it. We're never going to stop using it. We're going to need more of it. We're going to have more power. But the critical thing here to me is that now big tech is incentivized to bring that capital to the energy sector. So I think there's a play there. But where does the value in that movement of capital where does the value get captured? Does it get captured at the app level? Because the rise of the internet comes, it's kind of probably a similar parallel, is like do the telecommunications providers capture the value? Do the energy providers capture the value? Do the hardware makers, the software makers, the app makers, like where does value get captured in that new flow?
That's a very good question. Oh, sorry. I'll be right back. I'll think about that. Door rang. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Good luck.
Dude,
What do
I
you
do.
think,
This is something I've been chewing on a lot lately because of a book I'm reading called Chip Wars. And Chip Wars goes through the history and the current status of the semiconductor industry, which obviously is huge on a geopolitical as well as technological innovation standpoint. And one of the big topics in that was essentially all of these companies that we now, are huge titans in the tech space, still huge titans in the tech space like IBM and Intel and TMSC. They all essentially figured out a little niche of that market that you're describing to capitalize on essentially Moore's law, and that these semiconductors were going to get twice as many transistors every year, indefinitely. So I do wonder if this is our generation's Moore's law, which might be even on a more aggressive timetable because of the ability to self-innovate. And so I've been spending a lot of time contemplating that question of, okay, how do we capitalize on what could be the giant technological innovation wave, and where is that going to be captured? So I don't have a good answer, but I've been definitely chewing on that question because I think that is the $1 trillion question. And the people who figure that out earlier are going to be the new titans of this next wave.
100%. And oftentimes it can be really counterintuitive as well. Like if you go back and read the Berkshire annual letters or annual letters to their shareholders or annual reports, that's what it's called. They have a great book, by the way, where it basically just puts all of them into one place for you. So you can just read through them all. And it has 1960 something to 2013 or 2023 or something like that. And I've been going back and reading all that stuff. And they talk a little bit about this problem of value does not always accrue to where you think it accrues. Like, for example, in the textile industry, which is what Berkshire initially was, which is a whole different story, they saw that as there was more technology introduced to create better fabrics or linens or whatever, it lowered the cost of producing the next incremental shirt or linen or whatever, but the value was not accrued. The value did not accrue to the business or the manufacturer. The value accrued to the customer because everybody just lowered their prices. And so the ones that won were the ones that were building the new like the new hardware, and the customers who were buying it, but the manufacturers who were making it actually didn't accrue any value. They just had to pay for more upgrades to stay competitive. So it's like it can be counterintuitive sometimes. But jumping back to the initial question, Felix, what do you think?
Just back to the first point, and then we can talk more about Moore's law and compute and so on as well. But value capture, I see it as a funnel system as well, because the big value is going to come from mass adoption, which means that you need to have a lot of good interfaces and applications to get that going. But I do think that given that the big corporations are the ones helping kind of provide all the rails to use this technology, they're going to be the ones who capitalize the most. Similar to how, for example, Netflix bought their own ISP back in the day to help with reducing the overall costs of their bandwidth requirements because they're a streaming service. Similar things will probably happen here, where you have Meta or Amazon or whatever. I mean, AWS already provides a shit ton of compute, right? They are going to capitalize a bunch of this by having additional computation power across the globe, providing low latency, high bandwidth, and so on connections to help make sure that all the information that needs to flow is moving as fast as possible. And then a separate side to this as well, which we can delve into it on another episode, is quantum computing and how that will affect things as well, because that's also super, super interesting in how quantum computers can do a bunch of parallel computations at once, basically compute all the different types of outcomes in one single swoop instead of doing it sequentially and whatnot, which is, yeah, mind-boggling. But yeah, well, comments or questions on that side first, and then we can delve into the Moore's law and everything else as well.
Ben, any follow-ups on that point?
I just think it's such a big opportunity, and really nailing that's a transformational or a life-changing trade for whoever can figure that out.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the key reasons why DePIN was so interesting, right? Because it's focusing around kind of decentralizing the physical infrastructure across the globe, right? That's what DePIN stands for. Which makes it even more interesting, because then you can tap into the unused compute across the globe as well and give some value back in exchange for using their computation power as well, which in theory then should hopefully lower the overall costs if there's enough buy-in to use those decentralized infrastructure protocols out there.
Now, on the Moore's Law comparison, do you think that holds water? And sort of like piggybacking off of that, like you could see the value accrual in a bunch of different stages if that does end up holding water, where in the early days, it was economical enough to do infrastructure. In the late days, if you wanted to put in a new fab, it's going to cost you $50 billion and you need to
Yep.
have the technical. Then it sort of shifted from the hardware to the new products that you could make, from, the minute to missile system all the way to, the radio and the cell phone. And then sort of the next wave was, okay, the real leverage here is using that computational power to sell software and then put ads in that, because that offered the biggest leverage with the least amount of cost. So do you think
Yep.
that comparison holds water, and how do you see it sort of evolving?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think even Jensen Huang, he actually made an analogy to that a couple of months ago, how Moore's law has slowly been dwindling down. And for those who don't know the actual definition of it, I think it's the uh, what is it? It is the distance between,
Transistors?
yeah, the number of transistors on microchips doubles every 2 years, something like that. And similar to that, they've been talking about how it's been hard to achieve that with the GPU technology that they're working on, and how they're delving into other requirements to make up for all that. And that's parallel computation and everything to make sure that you can do the computation and go faster and faster. So if I recall correctly, he was talking about a Moore's law of computation rather than transistors, which again can delve into quantum computing as being the main solution in the end. But before then, parallel computation is the most important thing, which is GPUs, which then leads into AI and everything like that as well, because that's what runs AI today. So it definitely holds a lot of truth to it. And we're going away from the age of information and data to the age of kind of AI and how to use that data even more on a everyday basis, it feels like. So yeah, I agree.
Now we're coming up on the top of the hour here. Want to be respectful of both of your guys' time. So is there anything in 2 minutes that we can add on AI agents that we didn't cover that you think are important?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah, we'll need a
Uh,
part two for sure.
yeah, those who are interested in getting involved with it, I would read up on the different frameworks that are out there and see if you want to delve into and do some low level or high level programming, I guess. So not too complex. ELIZA is a very good starting point by AI16Z, and it's a great entry point to get going with like TypeScript and typical programming as well. So it could be a lot of fun, and you get a good feedback loop because you can define your own character, you can interact with him or her or they or whatever you want to have as a pronoun, and just get to explore. And who knows, maybe you can come up with something that is very, very novel and intuitive as well, and that's something that you can open up to the world.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, we'll definitely drop a link down in the description so anyone who wants to go and check that out. Ben, anything on your end before we wrap?
No, just want to wish everybody on the pod and all the viewers and listeners a happy new year, and excited for us to charge into 2025 and this bull run with spirits high, maybe belt belt buckles a little tight from the holidays, and so get back on your workout grinds, get back on your healthy eating grinds, and yeah, I'll see you guys all in Valhalla, which is where we're going during this bull run of this year.
Love it. Love it. Bring in Norse mythology.
I also love that like Valhalla means by definition we all died. So that's been like a common a common
Hey,
sort of like a goal for crypto. I use it myself, but I'm like, what does that exactly mean?
I mean, it's for the Vikings, that's the place to be, right? You basically end up in this huge ass food hall in Asgard, and you go out and you fight, you die, and you wake back up in there and you eat until you puke, and then you do it all again. So
I'm all
that's
about
the
it. I
bull
can't
market
wait to
cycle.
see. It's what I want to see what Ragnar thinks of jujitsu, and
Oh yeah, yeah, love it.
it might not be intense enough for Valhalla. There's not enough like sort of like blood and bone. You don't take advantage of our ethereal forms.
Well, maybe it's maybe it's the death of our former poor selves in the rebirth of our new wealthy elite selves.
Yeah, we're ascending
I
into
love
the
it.
data stream.
That's why people
That's
come to
right.
the Interlinked podcast, not only for cutting edge technical information, but also for speculation on the mythology of crypto and Valhalla. We'll be back with another episode of Interlinked in the future. Thank you again, Felix, for joining us. Ben, always a pleasure to co-host with you. And we will see you all next week. Take care, everyone.